Elden Ring podcast. We're going to go over this new interview with Miyazaki from IGN. There's a lot of really good information here. It's like our first interview with, like, I would say more in-depth information. So there's a lot of interesting things going on here. All right, so let's get into it. So let's skip right to the part where they actually start asking him questions. We don't care about the fluff. Here we go. Give us a general overview of what's happening in the world of Elden Ring and its story. Miyazaki answers, it's very difficult to summarize briefly what Elden Ring is, but to us it represents a culmination of all our know-how, all our passion across all of these games to deliver a brand new dark fantasy IP. We're extremely excited to finally reveal it. And I think as far as some of the characteristics go, we really focus on bringing something with just an enormous sense of scale and this broadness and openness of the lands between, the world that you'll explore. As part of creating this vast world, we wanted to bring on involvement from George R. R. Martin, and he brought things to the table that we couldn't have done by ourselves, in terms of that rich storytelling and that sense of character and drama, so we really appreciate his involvement as well. Along with this vast new world, we have created a number of new action systems and game systems to enhance this, and to go hand in hand with the vast new world. Interesting. For instance, the player can jump now, and you can ride on horseback, and there's a number of new additions to combat, which just raises the level of freedom higher than our previous games. It all matches with the sense of scale of the world itself. I think another major difference, or major point of this title, is the number of choices you have available in combat. So while you can just choose to go in head on, we also have a number of alternative elements, such as to be able to summon the spirits of deceased enemies and use them as allies in battle. So we have a number of elements that let you approach different situations at a high level of freedom. I think that would pretty much cover everything. This answer is very lengthy. There's already a lot to get into here. So I think the main takeaway from this is a lot much bigger. All right, so if we were to compare this to Dark Souls, because I think that's what everyone's doing right now, is comparing Elden Ring to Dark Souls, which is fair, because I think Miyazaki will even say later in the interview, and he has said it before, Elden Ring is an evolution of Dark Souls. It's like the new Dark Souls, quote unquote. But this is a lot different than Dark Souls, though, because Dark Souls as a game and as a system, it doesn't have like a lot of different things going on. Dark Souls, one of its defining features is that it's relatively refined. Like there's rolling, there's blocking, there's some magic, but the combat doesn't have like it's not a flashy game. Dark Souls is much more grounded. It seems like with this game, they're going bigger and broader. They want more things going on. They want to give the player more things they can do, not just in combat, but in RPG and the scale of everything that can happen. So that's a big departure from Dark Souls. And it's going to be interesting to see how these things are interplay with each other. Like, is it going to be the type of situation where if you're good at the game, you can easily ignore all this stuff and not care? Or is it going to be the type of game where you really are encouraged to explore a lot of these options to actually succeed in the game and actually be able to do things quickly and effectively? So that's kind of the main thing. And I don't think we'll know that until we actually play the game, because it's hard to know those specifics, but it's very interesting. This is very different than like how Dark Souls would do things. And like the summon the spirits of the deceased, that's another thing that I'm very curious how they're going to approach that, like how it's actually going to be implemented. So let's continue. You mentioned the Lands Between, which I think is an interesting name, because it's not really a traditional name for a world. Like Dark Souls Lordran, the Dark Souls Tree Drink Lake, and so forth, can you explain the significance of the Lands Between as a setting for this game? We're happy you picked up on that, because the Lands Between is actually a name that was invented by George R. R. Martin himself when he was coming up with the impetus for the world and writing its history and its deep mythos. So we wanted to implement that into the game. We hope that as well as taking away the idea of it being the sort of impetus and the starting place of the world, people feel that it's really like an invitation to this mysterious new land. There's a lot of elements of exile and return, and the Lands Between is supposed to invoke this feeling of something that's very mysterious and very ethereal. And we hope that when players play the game, they're going to experience that. So this sounds very Dark Souls-like, but I like where this is getting at, because something I've missed from Software games in more modern times is that sense of mystery and secrets that they're talking about here. One of the cool things about, not to be a boomer here, But one of the cool things about playing Demon Souls when it first came out and Dark Souls 1 when it first came out was the secrets, which is something that I think has definitely been lost both in terms of how the community plays these games and also the games themselves. If they're going to try to recapture that magic, which would be very difficult, but really have a game that feels very mysterious and there's even for months after release, maybe secrets to find. That would be really cool. I hope they can. That's hard to pull off, especially in now that From Software games are much more popular and the internet is much more ravenous about consuming a game as quickly as possible. But it would be very cool to see a game where there's actually secrets still hidden in the game, and there's a sense of unknowing that I feel like we've missed that in a lot of modern games, not just Dark Souls. So that's cool. Hmm. I was hoping that you could kind of define some terms that we just made aware by the trailer. The player character is known as a tarnished. Can you explain what the Elden Ring is and the significance of it being shattered? So this may lead a little lengthy. Oh boy, here we go. Okay, here we go. So first of all, in the world of Elden Ring, the lands between are blessed by the presence of the Elden Ring in the Erd Tree, which symbolizes its presence. And this is giving grace or blessing to the people throughout the land, great and small. Okay. What this represented in them is a sort of golden light or this golden aura that specifically shines in their eyes. And this symbolizes the blessing or the grace of the Erd Tree. However, after a time, there were some individuals who lost this grace and the light faded from their eyes, and they are what is known as tarnished. So the tarnished, you could call them tarnished individuals who have lost grace. And this was a long time preceding the setting of the game, a long time before. The ancestors of the character that are present in the world were banished and exiled from the lands between these tarnished. Then a long time after that, the Elden Ring was shattered in a historical event. Interest. I wonder. I like the way he's phrases. All right, so I don't want to interject too much on this. I want to read the whole thing before I do that. But this could be an important point. So the way he refers to that as a historical event, I wonder if that's going to be a part of the game where there's like a flashback sequence where you play through that or something. Like, you know how in Dark Souls 2, there were those moments in the game where you go back into a memory and see like a war of Drangleic, and you get an item. I wonder. This makes me really feel like that. I really have a strong sense reading this that there could be a key moments in the game where like you revisit like the shattering of the Elden Ring and maybe see it from a different perspective and learn about the lore and also have some boss fight against some past character. Because the way he specifically refers to that as a historical event, I think that could be very interesting. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that's how it comes off to me. All right, let's continue. This triggers the return of this lost grace, and it calls out to the Tarnished who were once exiled from the lands between, and it guides them back. So this is the starting point, or the impetus of the game itself, the Tarnished being called by the lost grace and returning to the lands between. I feel like one of the main themes of the game is how the player, the Tarnished, approaches or treats this newfound grace in their return to the land they were once banished from. How they interpret this in the meaning. It's not just the player character, of course, it's lots of characters in the game who are all beckoned back and will have their own adventures and motives. We want the player to discover for themselves what that means, and how they want to begin their adventure. There's a there, but he's not really giving us a lot of specifics, so it's hard to say much. Like I guess there's going to be a lot of other NPCs in the game that you meet at different regions that are either good or bad characters, which is something they've dabbled in Dark Souls, but maybe they're going to focus on that more, because that always has been a thing in Dark Souls games, but it's usually pretty I don't know the word for it, not like a huge focus, right? Like there would be like in Dark Souls 2 you meet now I'm blanking on that girl's name, but if you just ignore her, nothing really happens, and even if you talk to her, it's not that consequential. I wonder if they're going to have more of a consequence to how you interact with these other characters. That would be cool. I would like actually to see that. Maybe like if you ignore a character, maybe they will try to attack you later, or maybe if you talk to them, you form an ally with them and they'll help you. That could be interesting. More direct, like that could be something they learn from Sekiro. Maybe have more actual, you know, character arcs with other characters in this actual story. Let's see. One of the things that really struck me in the trailer was the enemy design. Some of the wildest designs I've ever seen, really. I wonder if there's any sort of unifying theme or inspiration that you use when coming up with the enemies and the boss for this game, and if you could elaborate a little about them. I'm glad you picked up on that. There are several themes to the enemy designs. One main theme of the main boss of this game, in particular, they're essentially demigods, and characters who are written, again, by George R. R. Martin. and they inherited the mad, tainted power of the Elden Ring shards once it was shattered. We wanted to depict these beings as not just creatures and horrible monsters, but having an element of heroism and an element of mythology to them. Essentially, they are the old gods of this world. Okay, that's sounds very Dark Souls esque. I'm not gonna lie, very Dark Souls. And part of the design of these major characters is inheriting the shards of the Elden Ring. They each inherited a different power or element, so to speak, and each was twisted and warped in its own way. And it brought a tainted strength to each of them. They each fell to madness and fell to ruin in their own individual ways. So while there is a heroic and mythological element to them, they are also going to have this very mad taint and this deep-seated ruin to them. We hope players enjoy discovering each of them for themselves. I mean, I don't have too much to say about that. That seems, very par of the course of a Dark Souls game. Not to, downplay it too much, but it's like in Dark Souls 1, there was this gods that created the world. They made it better for humans to live, but then, a catastrophic thing happens, and now you have to kill them for certain reasons. But maybe again, it could be a thing where we're given more actual character on them, because in the trailer, which I'll put a link in the below if you want to see it again, or just if you haven't seen it, one of the bosses actually talks to you and says, he's like saying like, you tarnished don't belong here. That's different. And again, there could be more actual character here, because while it's the same general theme in like the Dark Souls games, the bosses they never say much, very rarely for them to say much. And you don't get a lot of specifics on their actual motivation or character. It's usually very vague. And if you get anything, it's in lore, and that's all, it's very you have to interpret your own meaning. If there's more actual characterization of these bosses, then it could be very interesting. It could be like more involved. This is a very personal question. Mimics are very, very scary to me. And Dark Souls mimics are the scariest finding mimics in any video games I've ever played. Are there mimics in Elden Ring? You probably won't find mimics in that exact same form. It's different world to Dark Souls, but we hope to give you surprises in some ways. So I think he's saying no, but we'll see. So I've learned that there are 6 areas in Elden Ring. Can you give into a little detail about each of them? And is this the kind of thing where you can go into any of these areas at any time, or is there a specific order? So the Lands Between is made up mainly of these 6. Oh, also I want to mention, oh god, I should have mentioned this earlier. Lands Between very strongly reminds me of Things Betwixt from Dark Souls 2, because isn't that the same? Basically, those terms are interchangeable, right? Don't they mean the same thing? Anyway, just thought I'd mention that. So the Lands Between is made up things of these 6 large areas. It's divided into 6 major areas, and they're the domains of the major demigod characters who we just talked about. While the areas are lined up in a way so you would normally tackle them in a specific order, you don't have to follow it. We wanted to give a free level of progression and exploration throughout the Lands Between, so there's a lot of different ways. You won't be able to access everything from the start, but there are a lot of different ways you can approach each area. And there's a lot of freedom into which order you tackle different areas as well. One of our big themes for development of this new world was that because of the grandeur and sense of scale of it, we didn't want players to get lost and not have any clue of what to do or where to go. So there's an element of guidance, particularly at the beginning. There is a mainline route that they can follow, but anytime they're free to break off at this route and take the untrodden path. We wanted to focus on a design that caters to that high level of freedom, that free order of progression throughout the world, which order you choose to tackle the different areas, the different bosses, and how you approach each of them as well. You may get sent to a couple of areas against your will, but there's a lot of ways that you can explore and approach these different situations. Okay, I honestly don't really like this. Again, I don't want to be a buzzkill in Elden Ring hype, but this is not what I was expecting. And again, it feels, not to criticize Miyazaki, but I feel this is a little playing safer than From Software normally does. Like, I'm kind of surprised that he's so concerned about players, getting lost, or the world being too big, because I feel like one of From Software's trademarks, especially when it comes to games like this, is to not be that concerned with players' safeties, quote unquote. Like, being like, I would say, if you're making a game of this style and it's open world, getting lost in the game would be part of the experience and even part of the fun if you're into these games. Figuring out how to navigate this open world would be part of the challenge and surviving that. So I'm I'm kind of concerned that right from the jump they're this concerned about players getting lost. They were so concerned to the point where they basically did design a quote unquote intended path. Maybe I was assuming too much, but I was fully under the impression that, this being like From Software's approach to open world design, that they would not go down that route of making an open world only to then tell you, hey, do this, do this, do this. Oh, and you can't do that. Because also them saying like, oh, there's going to be areas that are locked off from the start, and you can go you want, but there is an intended path, and there's going to be times where you're sent here and there. Like again, I don't like the sound of this. It sounds like the same problem, in at least in my opinion, the same problem so many open world games get into, where you make an open world, but then the design of the game is like almost antithetical to an open world where, yeah, it's an open world, but I'm supposed to go here, I'm supposed to go there, I can't go there, where it kind of defeats the point of it. Maybe I'm being too critical, judging too soon, but I really don't, I gotta be honest, I don't like how this comes off. Hopefully, when we actually play the game, it's not as restrictive as this is making me think it is. Can relate that back to any previous works in terms of how the open world is structured. Is there a central hub like Firelink Shrine from Dark Souls, one that expands outwards into multiple paths, or is it something different than that? So first, yes, not directly from the start, but there is a hub area that you can access a little later into the game. And as well as this hub, which you can branch out from, there are the 6 main areas in the lands between. And each of these 6 areas will house its own mainline dungeon map, which is again seamlessly connect the lands between itself. These will be the domains or areas of the main demigod bosses. From here, you're able to explore not only these mainline dungeon areas, but also a wide variety of catacombs, castles, and fortresses, which are interspersed throughout the map. These have a range of scale and scope, but the main dungeons are there. These 6. These are the ones that you're going to be heading on your adventure throughout the main world. So yeah, this has me. I gotta be honest. This does have me concerned. It kind of like, so these 6. He calls them dungeon maps. These 6 dungeon maps, are those even open world areas? Or are those 6 separate areas, are they basically like, more traditional like levels? Because if that's the case, this is very far removed, I think, what everyone thought this game would be. Is this just a situation where there's like a central open world area which has 6 like more traditional like set levels around them, or are those all, or are these dungeon maps also open world? Because calling them dungeon maps doesn't make me think they're open world. I'm kind of starting to think maybe this game isn't this. Like, I think everyone has been thinking that this is like a huge open world game, but it doesn't really come off that way the way he's describing it. Maybe we have a very different idea of what the game actually is going to be. I don't know. This is interesting. Is there a fast travel system that lets you quickly move around between these 6 areas, or do you go between them entirely on horseback? Fast travel is present. Of course, we do not want users to enjoy the aspect of exploration, and of course, we do want users to enjoy the aspect of exploration and cover the map for themselves. We also want to take into account the level of comfort of ease and play. So we have incorporated fast travel for those long distances. So the fact that well, I mean, fast travel's been in Dark Souls, has always been in Souls, Demon Souls, so it's hard to say much about that really. I can't, that doesn't really tell us too much. Switching gears a little bit, how do you approach leveling up in a game like this, which is much more open than projects that you've previously worked on? Is it a similar system of gaining currency from defeating enemies and potentially losing that level up currency when you die? Are there any difference in how you're approaching level ups in Elden Ring? So yes, with this increased sense of scale in this vast new map, we had to allow for a certain amount of progression and reward no matter which direction the player took and which path they take. Okay, this sounds good. Because of the high level of freedom. You will find those elements to battle, and those elements you're just exploring the world, which will allow you to keep that going. You can customize and craft items on the go by using materials found in the world. Wait, so is when okay, this is where it could be translation and hard what he means specifically. Is he actually saying you can create items like an actual crafting system? Interesting, because that's very different. I'm not going to assume that that's actually what he means here, because again, this could be, you know, it could be an issue where that's not exactly what he means, but it's possible, and that would be very different. Customization, he might mean upgrading stuff. I'm not sure. Basically, the main thing I think to take away from this is, it's not, since this is a big open world game, there's no like blacksmith you go to. It sounds like you do it on your own, which is I think is a good idea. Using materials found in the world. There are also more resources to recover health on the way, as you will be fighting for a longer time than before. The key word, I think, is retention and retaining a sense of progression. So we want them to keep going, to keep that flow as they explore and journey through the map. So yeah, this makes sense. So I think the main thing he's trying to get across here is he doesn't want to, it's not the type of game where, you go through a level for 20 seconds, die, respawn, go for 40 seconds, die. It's much longer from point A to B, from starting, from wherever you start to getting to wherever you go. And it's may not be as much high risk in every specific moment, but it's more of a long, you're managing long term situations, which could be very cool. Give an example from previous game, you could call the resurrection mechanic in Sekiro a retention of the sense of progress, not wanting to spoil that sense of rhythm or tempo the player has as they play. So we have a couple of elements in Elden Ring, which come from a similar kind of breed, something that will keep them going and keep them to encouraged to explore further, but you won't be able to resurrect in this game, of course. The Souls games, Bloodborne and Sekiro, they all have a very similar, distinct play. Yeah, Sekiro, Sekiro plays just like Bloodborne, of course. Thank you, IGN. Even though they all fundamentally very different in terms of their focus. Can you describe how the combat worked in Elden Ring and how it differs from previous games? Okay, this is an interesting question. We think rather than recommending a specific way for players to tackle each encounter, one of the things we wanted to stress in this game was, again, that freedom to choose how to take on encounters and how to approach these various situations. Okay, so there's a large variety of ways you can approach combat and a large range of abilities you can acquire. We wanted to allow the player to combine these different elements to find their own strategy and even take indirect approaches to combat if they wanted to. So yes, this is something we wanted to explore more than our previous games and really focus on, is the level of variety and this level of freedom of combat. So again, this is really reiterating and stressing what he said before. There's a lot more things. So again, not like Dark Souls. It sounds like there's gonna be a lot of different different ways to approach combat. So that it'll be curious to see how this actually plays out, because it's one thing to be told this, is one thing to actually experience it. But that should be interesting. Will there be a stamina meter like in Souls and Bloodborne games, or will it be no stamina meter like there was in Sekiro? The stamina bar exists in Elden Ring, but we'll feel it has less influence on the player overall. Wanted to make it feel less restrictive and contribute the little freedoms more than our previous titles. Interesting. That's weird. So they have a stamina bar, but it's going to be less restrictive. I wonder why they even brought it back then. I feel like why keep it then? I guess maybe for certain balance, I guess. I guess we'll see how that plays out. Throughout the trailer, we see a bunch of different techniques. We see a horse leaping up a cliffside, an attack jumping off a horseback, and there's a magic attack that extends your sword. Can you shed some light on these abilities, how they're earned? Does acquiring a technique lend itself to exploring more of the world? Yes, a part of making this new world with this new huge sense of scale was adding enjoyment to that sense of exploration, having players feel encouraged and give them a desire to explore as much as they want. And so that could be through acquiring new weapons and magic spells and abilities such as the different spirit summons. Spirit summons. We wanted to place these elements so the player will enjoy exploring the map and discovering these elements for themselves. There are cases in which you can buy them, arts, magic, etc., at stores or learn from NPCs, but they generally are hidden throughout the game's world for the player to discover through exploration, rather than unlocking them through a skill tree in a previous title. I think one thing that's worth mentioning is the skills, which is a returning feature from previous games, but again, we're concentrating on this level of freedom that it gives the player. So before, where there were certain skills attached to a certain weapon, okay, so he's referring specifically to Dark Souls 3 here. Now you're actually able to freely interchange skills between a large variety of weapons. There are, I believe, around 100 skills in total. Obviously, you're free to combine your different skills with different weapons. You're free to build your character with different weapons and equipment. You're free to learn magic as well. So if you throw all these things in, we think the build customization is going to be even richer and even more varied than before. Okay, whoa. So I think it's very clear he's referring to weapon arts from Dark Souls 3 when he says skills attached to a weapon. But after that, there's a lot of things going on here. So one, freely interchange skills between a large variety of weapons. How does that work? Is this something where like once you use a skill to a certain weapon, you quote unquote like unlock it, and then in some menu you can like place it on any weapon you want or something? And there's over 100 of them? So does like every individual weapon have its own unique skill? Like this is huge actually. Like so here, right? So to talk about the weapon art system from Dark Souls 3, I think most people agree it was an interesting idea, but probably it wasn't quite refined well. I think most people just kind of ended up ignoring them, and you really only see people worry about them in PvP, which is not great. In casual playthroughs, even in like, even if you're doing like a challenger or something, they're usually not that impactful. They're pretty undertuned, I would say, especially because they require FP, which is another thing you have to manage, and they usually are pretty slow, so you have to be careful about using them. I feel like most people just don't find them that useful. But if there's over 100 of them, and you can also mix and match them on any weapon, that changes everything. Because that means it's almost guaranteed that there's going to be good ones with that many. And again, the fact that if you could, I don't even know how that would work. So like if you have like, I don't know, some really fast like rapid slash dagger move, what happens if you put that on an axe? Is it like super slow, but now it does a ton of damage? Do you have a crazy punish move? I'm probably speculating too much, but this is huge. This is a huge piece of information we didn't have before. That is crazy. Honestly, that's crazy. 100 skills? People need to be talking about this. I don't know. That's very interesting. There's a lot about that we do not know. That's a game changer. Can you talk a little bit about how stealth plays a role in Elden Ring? There's one part in the trailer where we can see the character slowly creeping up behind a group of enemies. We think it's a relatively simple implementation of stealth, but has a wide variety of uses, and again, it contributes to this level of player freedom we feel. So you're able to crouch, you're able to sneak, and be less easily detectable in long grass detected. You're able to use that to your advantage to sneak up on the enemy, get a backstab, get a stealth attack. So backstabs are confirmed to be returning, but here, all right, this is another thing where it's hard to say, is this a translation issue or just him reiterating something, or is this literal? Is backstab and a stealth attack two different things? Which it very well might be, because the way he refers to this, it sounds like they're two different things. I'm going to assume this is just some weird translation thing. For now, I will assume backstab and stealth attack is the same thing, because that would be kind of weird, but maybe interesting. But you're also able to use it to bypass certain areas and to assess situations from afar. We wanted to create these opportunities for players to see what lies ahead of them and below them and around them and assess how they're going to confront that, or not, as the case may be. So stealth, while again is a simple implementation, allows for a lot more of these possibilities. So this, I think, is pretty standard. Like, it's kind of similar to Sekiro in that stealth is there, but it's not a main focus of the game. But that makes sense, because like I think in an open world game, stealth is something a player would naturally expect there to be, because you're going to be in these big areas and there's going to be lots of enemies moving around. So that could be interesting. I mean, then again, stealth has been in Souls games since Demon Souls, technically, but back then it was even more rudimentary. So again, not much of a surprise. There's always been some element of stealth in these modern From Software games. So I don't think that's too much of a surprise. You mentioned earlier that one of the aspects of freedom was that you can summon spirits to help you. Summoning players online has always been a big part of these games, and I was wondering in the trailer, when you see the character summon a bunch of blue phantoms, if that was online play or was that summoning spirits to help you? Interesting. Those ones you saw in the trailer, those were the spirit summons we mentioned earlier. Usually they're enemy characters, but you can summon them as allies to assist you in battle. So those were local offline summons. So that's very interesting. As I think most people, when they saw the trailer, assumed that was multiplayer. That was not multiplayer. So we still actually don't know how multiplayer works in Elden Ring. We know that it has multiplayer, both player cooperation and player versus player. But now we have this confirms we still don't know how actual multiplayer works. So it might work very differently than Dark Souls. We still don't really know. In these spirit summons, we feel like, as well as there being a large variety of them, they're a nice collectible hidden element within the game world to discover and to equip as you go. So, okay, I'll finish this. Interesting. They offer a lot of different strategic options, but also the player might find that they just like a certain enemy tagging along with them. A certain summon pleases them aesthetically. So there's a lot of strategic. Wow, there's a lot of strategic and a lot of personal touch to these summons. And we hope that players will also enjoy discovering their own progression elements as well. In Elden Ring, you'll be able to summon fellow players so he mentions, again, you can also summon other players, but it's still kind of vague. Does summoning other players work the same way? I don't think so. So we still don't really know much about how the actual multiplayer works. But about this mechanic, the way he described this makes me think I might have been right about how the weapon art thing works. Because I was saying, like, is because he said you can equip the weapon, the new combat arts, whatever they're called, but they're also attached to weapons. So I was thinking maybe when you equip a weapon and then you use the combat art, you like unlock it, quote unquote, in a menu, and then you can set it. In the way he describes this makes it sound very similar. Whereas he say, he says, a nice collectible hidden element. And hold on, let me scroll up. Doesn't he actually say you can equip them here? Let's see. Maybe oh yeah, and to equip them as you go. So is this another type of thing where like maybe you defeat the enemy in battle in a certain way or something, and then that like quote unquote unlocks them, so then you can equip whatever one once you have it. I get the feeling there might be a much more elaborate like menu system where you, like when he says truly customizing your character, this might be the big thing about this game that we don't know about that really makes it next level. There might be like a much more elaborate like menu system where you have all sorts of things that you can set and customize and equip. This is really exciting because that would be a big departure from past Dark Souls games and From Software games, because while the games have, the Dark Souls games specifically are RPGs, they have stats. The stats are pretty basic, and the RPG stuff is not that advanced. It's usually just, you raise your damage stat, you raise your health stat, maybe get some endurance, whatever. It's usually pretty simple. But if you actually have like, oh, equip your combat arts, equip your spirit summons, equip which force buffs, you get all this specific stuff. This is pretty cool. This is pretty interesting. If I'm right about the way I'm interpreting this and if it works this way, but it sounds like that's what he's getting at. I was reading back some older interviews with you, and in 2016 you said, I think my philosophy towards game development is first, set a certain game system and then apply a worldview that matches that. Has that philosophy changed at all since then? And if it hasn't, how has that philosophy informed the development of Elden Ring? It's still intact largely, but we think one main difference is having the involvement of George R. R. Martin from the start and having him paint that picture of the world's history and the mythos. We sorted out an element of the world building first, so then explore the game systems and the rest of the game from that. This was quite a fresh approach, and rather than imposing new restrictions on the game, George Martin himself was very open to us prioritizing the game system and leaving out anything we didn't want to explore. But it ended up not being like that. It ended up being a huge source of inspiration and impetus for the design of the game. So the world building and the systems went hand in hand. It was a really great collaboration. We had this initial impetus from George R. R. Martin's mythos, and we used that to paint the foundation and the initial layers of the game. An example of that would be now how key characters are tarnished and they lost grace. This is the initial spurring moment for the player character. But then on top of that, we're obviously going to build a lot of our own world building and our own story elements and other gameplay elements that are necessary to the game. And necessary to the player's guidance and how they find a footing in the world. Right from the start, we do have elements in place that are going to lead the player down that mainline track that they're free to branch off from at any time they like. But on top of that, there are the fragmented pieces of the story that they're able to find and to decipher as they go. This element of world building and lore has not changed from previous titles, but it's obviously built on that foundation of George R. R. Martin's lore. So again, this game and the narrative go hand in hand in that respect. So it sounds like he's saying the way that the lore is structured and the way the game is structured isn't that much different than Dark Souls, but it'll probably come off very different from what we're used to because they really did build a game around George R. R. Martin's ideas, which is obviously very different than like Miyazaki's approach. So that could be interesting. It's hard to say much about this without, we'll have to see for ourselves. But basically, it sounds like Miyazaki's really fanboying over George R. R. Martin, which is fine. He's a big fan of George R. R. Martin. That's why he's on the project. But yeah, this could be cool. It could be an interesting way to give, like he says, a fresh approach. Give a new, new creative energy to the games. So you sometimes getting an outsider's perspective is good for these reasons. I guess this is similar to what you're saying, but obviously with the Souls games and Bloodborne, you've gained a reputation for a very specific type of storytelling that's told within the margins of the actual game. That changed a bit with Sekiro, where it's a little more traditional. I wonder, do you find your approach to storytelling as something that's evolving? How do you describe that style of storytelling as it pertains to Elden Ring? I'm not sure if we'd personally call it an evolution. We feel like we might get laughed at for that. Miyazaki's so humble. What we do is retain that sense of the player discovering things for themselves and enjoying uncovering the world both in terms of action and narrative for themselves. We don't want to force anything on the player. That much has not changed. There are two things we wanted to really concentrate on with this topic you brought up. One is the ease of understanding. The level of understanding the players have of the story and the narrative, and we feel like, because this is a game that's based around its characters, this is a lot easier to understand, a lot easier to approach in that sense. So it's less abstract. while the player character themselves is, as you might be familiar with other games, a little more nameless, a little more of a blank slate for the player to project themselves onto, other characters will provide that sense of depth and that sense of color and multifarious motives and ulterior motives that are going to keep them engaged and keep them second guessing as they explore the world. Okay, so this goes back to what I was saying before, and it seems like I was correct when I was saying it's possible that the bosses in this game and other characters will be much more involved, have much more character, and have more of a interaction with the player. So it seems like that there's a little bit of Sekiro there, but again, it's sticking to like more the Dark Souls style. But again, they're trying to make a story that's you know it less hidden. So that I think this is good. This is making the game again more accessible. And I like it in this regard. Have an actual story with actual characters. So as I'm going through, I understand what's going on. And lore is good in a certain regard, but for me, lore doesn't hold up that well if it's not supporting a more involved plot and story. It sounds like they're trying to make a more involved lore plot and story with more interesting characters and then supplement that with lore, which I'm all for. We hope that the level of understanding is easy to access, but then again, there's a lot more depth than there is as they explore. And this depth, again, this idea of undiscovering the world as you go, picking up its many little pieces, is multi-layered. It's complex. It's very fascinating. This is something I myself enjoy a lot in these games and in other RPGs I play. We had the greedy approach of wanting to make these two elements stand together, of wanting it to be easy to understand but also give a lot of depth. But we feel that with the help of George R. R. Martin and the story base that he provided for us, this has been not only attainable but very successful this time. So again, he really likes George R. R. Martin, but I guess what he's saying is he's basically saying, "Hey, my From Software fans, my hardcore fans, don't worry. Yes, this is more accessible. It's easier to understand, but the deep lore, the deep secrets, those are still there. There's still stuff to uncover. Don't worry. We still got you." That's what he's getting at here, and that's always been From Software's way. They might make the games more approachable, but they still care about their hardcore fans, so this is good. Basically, the story is going to be more involved on a basic level, but it will also have your lore and your secret characters and all that good stuff. So everybody should be happy there. That's the message, at least. We'll see. I think that wraps up all my questions. Thank you so much. I hope it was okay. This is actually our first interview for Elden Ring. I guess Miyazaki, that's weird to me because I guess what he's saying was like our first detailed or big interview. Appreciate your time. In a single interview, it's very hard to go into deal of detail and answer all your questions. I imagine that's a lot. Wow, I can't read. There's a lot that's difficult to imagine, difficult to grasp. But as far as I'm concerned, after my 10 years or so of directing games, this really feels like a culmination of everything that I've enjoyed about game development and everything I've brought to this point. I really hope that as fans of the games, you'll enjoy it. Wow, that's a big statement from Miyazaki. On behalf of the whole team at From, this is a compilation of everyone's passion here and everyone's dedication. So we just really enthusiastic about this project, and we can't wait for people to play it. So wow, so Miyazaki, he's not one to say things he doesn't mean. I've read a lot of interviews from him. He's not he's not like a PR guy. He's a very genuine dude, and he usually just says what it is. So like, if this was like a random interview, I might just assume that this is PR fluff. But from him, I don't read it that way. For him to say that like this is like he feels that this game is the culmination of everything he's worked on since he's got started with Demon Souls, and that they're this is like this is their he's basically saying like this is our big this is everything, like this is our it almost sounds like he's saying this is our like our opus, like this is our that kind of concerns me in some ways, like maybe you're putting too many chips on the table here, but it's very exciting too. Like he's saying like this is everything, this is us, this is our grand project. So that's pretty interesting. Whew. So I guess I'll just ask my Twitch chat right now, what do you guys think? Yeah, magnum opus, what do you guys think about all this stuff? Any questions? What do you guys think? This is very interesting. There's a lot to take in here. Any questions from my chat before we end the podcast? Whew. A lot of things to take in there. Some good and some bad. That made me think if you could just use those offline summons to beat the game alone without killing anyone yourself. Okay, so about the summons. So I was thinking about that a lot. So I'm glad you asked that, Pemmy, about the summons. Here's what I was thinking about that. Um, I get the feeling this is going to be a game where there's going to be a lot more big. There might be a lot more multi-enemy fights, like more enemies on screen at one time. So similar to Sekiro has a lot more enemies on time, and Sekiro has its own way to deal with that. But they probably, this is not a ninja game. It's more of a Dark Souls game. So I'm thinking the best way to deal with that, this is a mechanic to help deal with that. So co-op is probably a bit much bigger focus on this game. But if you don't want a co-op, having your ghost friends like an ability you could use is going to be a big part of that. But then I'm also thinking that there might be a simple way to balance that. So I could see it being something where like there could be they might return like the charge system of magic from like say Dark Souls 1 where you could only use certain spells certain times. So maybe you can only summon your ghost friends like 2 times per rest or whatever they call it. So like oh you got ambushed by like a bunch of enemies, summon your ghost friends, but oh no, you can't do that anymore until you get to the next spot, so there's more tension now. So I think there's ways they could balance it like that. I think it's probably a type of thing where there's going to be a lot more multi-enemy fights, so it's going to be very interesting in that regard. I want more info on magic. They didn't really tell us much about magic. What part regarding the dungeon aspect are you concerned about? So the reason I'm kind of concerned about the way he phrased that is I'm worried that the 6 different regions that are like connected to the open world area are not open world, and that would really kind of like go against what I think everyone thought this game was be. If those are not really open world areas, and then it would kind of mean that the game isn't really open world, and that would be kind of disappointing. Like I don't know, the way he phrased it made it sound like they're not really open world areas. Maybe I'm reading into it too much, but that would be I don't know, that would be a big letdown for me. I was expecting in the way that they had talked about it up till now was that the game was going to be like a large open world From Software game, a different take on open world. But if it's like the way it kind of came off in this interview is like you have a central area that's open world, but ultimately your goal is to go to these 6 other regions and beat the bosses there. And if those 6 other areas are like basically different, a bunch of different, set dungeons or something, yeah, I don't know. I don't like that. Yeah, it does exactly, some shady. It sounds similar to like the Demon Soul system, but instead of it, just being a fast travel and do levels, you have an open world that connects to a few levels, which I'm not really. I don't know. That's not what I was expecting. That sounds kind of not that interesting. I don't know. But again, we'll see. I get the game isn't out for 7 months. We haven't seen that much about it. Maybe I'm wrong about maybe something got lost in translation. I don't know. Yeah, just travel to the place, then do the thing. Yeah. So I think unless anyone has any questions, we'll wrap this up here. But there's a lot. Oh, the weapon art system sounds really interesting. Perhaps it's more of a long-term stamina system than roll 3 times, wait for stamina. Maybe, Gavin. Maybe. So yeah, I guess we'll end it here.